The film begins by showing Frank and Sarah shopping at a supermarket. Since he started dating Sarah, Frank has always been overprotective. Additionally, they hardly ever eat at restaurants because Frank fears being poisoned by his enemies. It turned out, Frank is a former CIA agent and one of the most dangerous. During his service, Frank completed many high-level missions such as killing cartel bosses, terrorist leaders, and even overthrowing a government. However, after retiring, Frank fell in love with a customer service representative named Sarah. While shopping, Frank's old friend and former agent, Marvin, suddenly appears and asks for his help with a mission. However, Frank immediately refuses the offer, all to protect his lover. Sarah actually wants her boyfriend to get back into action, but Frank remains steadfast in his decision. As Frank and Sarah leave the supermarket, the car Marvin was driving suddenly explodes, killing him instantly. Seeing this, Frank can't believe that Marvin is truly dead because he has faked his death many times before. Therefore, at the funeral, instead of being sad, Frank stabs Marvin's corpse with a needle to ensure his friend's death. Upon realizing the truth, Frank didn't expect this to happen. As a tough man, Frank never cries, but Marvin's death shakes his feelings. As soon as he left the church, Frank was confronted by FBI agents who wanted to ask him some questions about his past missions. In the end, Frank was forced to comply because if he resisted, he would become an enemy of the government. Not long after, it turned out that it wasn't just the FBI who wanted to interrogate Frank. That afternoon, a government official named Jack also wanted to meet with him. Jack came there pretending to be a lawyer, but suddenly he pulled out a gun and started shooting everyone there. Therefore, gunfire echoes through the building. The FBI chief and his troops try to stop Jack, but they are all slaughtered, leaving Frank helpless because his hands are still handcuffed to the table. At that moment, Jack immediately questions Frank about a project called Nightshade. As a threat, Jack also plans to torture Sarah if Frank doesn't talk. However, Frank managed to free himself, but the room is surrounded by enemy troops. Seeing this, Jack will do anything to capture Frank alive. At first, he thinks it's impossible for Frank to escape because he is trapped and his hands are still cuffed. However, his assumption is greatly mistaken. In an instant, Frank defeats 3 Special Forces members. With 4 left, Frank continues his massacre. One by one, he takes down his enemies and tries to use his best abilities to survive. Unfortunately, due to the circumstances, Frank is eventually captured. At that moment, Marvin suddenly reappears, after he had successfully faked his death. Thanks to his help, they managed to escape from there. At that moment, Marvin also secretly saved Sarah from the troops that Jack had sent to her house earlier. From the beginning, Marvin tried to warn Frank about this chaos, but he was not listened to. All these problems started when a secret document was leaked on the internet. The document explained a project called Nightshade, a special mission that Frank and Marvin had carried out in 1979. Meanwhile, Frank himself didn't care about being pursued by the government because he was more concerned about Sarah's safety. In the end, Frank tries to convince Sarah to hide somewhere, but Sarah, who loves challenges, wants to join him. Back to Jack, who was seen meeting with a general to report. At that moment, he reports that from now on, Frank and Sarah will be branded as terrorists by the government, and their names have even been added to the Interpol list. The general feels this is still not enough and wants to hand over this matter to the defense minister. However, his action is opposed by the head of intelligence, named Davis. As a result, Jack is forced to kill the general. Additionally, Jack also suggests that they start hiring the best assassin from Korea, named Han. According to him, only Han can capture Frank. Sometime later, Han was seen in a meeting with a mafia boss. In that meeting, Han is not allowed to bring any equipment, but this is not a problem for him because he can eliminate his target using anything. For example, with just a piece of paper, Han can take someone out. At that moment, Han is very happy when tasked with capturing Frank because he has long held a grudge against him. On the other side, the head of British intelligence finally learns about the leak of Project Nightshade. Like America, he also orders a hitman named Victoria to capture Frank. It turned out, Victoria is a retired MI6 agent and a good friend of Frank. But, pressured by the government, Victoria is forced to accept the offer given. Meanwhile, Marvin has also kidnapped a military official to explain what Project Nightshade actually is. It is revealed that during the Cold War between America and the Soviet Union, a scientist managed to create a sophisticated nuclear bomb. That bomb was taken to the Soviet Union as part of a peace treaty. However, the weapon suddenly disappeared without a trace. Currently, people believe that Frank and Marvin know the whereabouts of the nuclear bomb because they were the ones assigned to escort the scientist. Unfortunately, Frank says that the scientist has long been dead, killed by Soviet intelligence. Because of this, they eventually seek out the person who leaked the nightshade information on the internet. Based on Frank's observations, the perpetrator is likely someone named Frog. On the other side, Victoria suddenly calls and informs Frank about the mission she received from the British government. Victoria also says that his life is in danger because Han has already started moving. In fact, Han's assistant is currently tracking Frank's whereabouts. While using his private jet, Han flies to the city where Frank and his team are staying. Upon arrival, one of his subordinates also reports that he has installed several CCTV cameras in the room where Frank is staying. However, it turns out it was all a trap. From the beginning, Frank had been targeting Han's private jet. Instead of fleeing, Frank and Marvin took advantage of their enemy's arrival. Using Han's private jet, they immediately fly to Paris, the city where the informant named Frog is located. Unfortunately for them, upon arrival, Frank encountered a Russian intelligence agent named Miranda, who was his ex-girlfriend. According to Marvin, Frank still couldn't resist his ex-girlfriend. At that moment, Miranda explains that the Russian government wants to cooperate with him to find the nuclear bomb. In return, Miranda promises not to capture and hand over Frank to Interpol. As Marvin predicted, once again Frank can't refuse his ex-girlfriend's offer. Long story short, they eventually find the Frog's whereabouts. It turned out, Frog makes a living by selling secret military information from various countries. That afternoon, Frog is meeting with some terrorists in a restaurant. After Marvin confirms that their target is correct, Frank and the others join in. However, Frog is very good at escaping, so Frank warns Sarah not to look directly at him. Unfortunately, Sarah accidentally makes eye contact with Frog. After that, he starts attacking and firing shots, managing to escape by seizing someone's bike. Not wanting to waste the opportunity, Miranda has already prepared a vehicle for their chase. Seeing this, Sarah was jealous of Frank, so she insists on joining the action. Unfortunately, Sarah drives recklessly but ends up getting trapped in an alley. Shortly after, they finally capture Frog, and without hesitation, Frank and his team immediately start torturing Frog to make him reveal where he has hidden the secret file about Project Nightshade. Unfortunately, none of them can force him to talk. Eventually, Sarah takes the initiative to use a different method. With her beauty and charm, Sarah convinces Frog to talk. Frank realizes that his girlfriend is wildly jealous, so that night he plans to take her out for dinner. But just as they start talking, Miranda suddenly knocks on their door and asks Frank to come with her. Hearing this, Marvin warns Frank not to go because it might be a trap like before. As usual, Marvin's instincts were always right, because Miranda planned to take the key to the storage box that Frank had given her. It turned out that from the beginning, Miranda wanted to control the secret files alone, and Frank was unaware that his drink had been poisoned. As a result, Frank's body became completely paralyzed. Seeing this, Sarah took advantage of the situation to vent her frustration. Fortunately, Marvin, who had anticipated this, had secretly swapped the deposit box key with someone else's from the start. A few hours later, when Frank is fully recovered, Marvin then takes him for a walk and gives him some advice about his love life, as he has been out of control for the past 2 days. However, in the middle of their conversation, Han suddenly appears and furious because Frank stole his private jet. Han doesn't stop shooting until everything is leveled. Fortunately, Marvin always carries dynamite in his pocket, which they use to escape. The next morning, when they go to the bank to open the deposit box, Frank sees Miranda being detained by anti-terror forces. It turns out the deposit box key that Marvin gave was actually for one of the terrorist leaders. Sometime later, they finally get the file about Nightshade, where the document clearly states that there is one person who knows where the nuclear bomb is hidden. This person is currently being protected by the British government. Without wasting time, Frank and his team immediately set off for London. Unfortunately, as soon as they cross the English border, Victoria suddenly arrives to complete her mission. She sets fire to the car Frank is driving, but it turns out that Victoria is there to save them by faking the deaths of Frank and his friends. Inside the burning car are 4 bodies that Victoria had kept for situations like this. Not long after, they finally arrived in London and discovered that the person they were after was being held in a prison that also functioned as a mental hospital. To get inside, Victoria pretended to be insane, successfully fooling all the nurses. Eventually, Victoria and Frank managed to infiltrate the facility. The person they are looking for is a special patient with a mental disorder. The patient is even confined in a separate room. But when Frank sees the person, he is utterly shocked because the man is Dr. Bailey, the scientist who created the nuclear bomb, who was supposed to have died 32 years ago. It turned out that the British government had been hiding him all this time, and Dr. Bailey's brain was not functioning normally because he was regularly injected with a special drug. So, they had to make him unconscious to make it easier to take him away. Additionally, they still didn't know the British government's motive for hiding Dr. Bailey all this time. On the other side, to ensure Frank's safe exit, Victoria lures all the guards to capture her. The news that Dr. Bailey is still alive reaches Davis's ears, and he immediately orders Jack to do whatever it takes to prevent the nuclear bomb from falling into the hands of other countries. Meanwhile, Frank and his friends flew to Russia. However, entering Russia was not easy, so Frank sought help from an old friend named Ivan. It was then revealed that the reason Frank went to Russia was to find a nuclear bomb that everyone was after. Unfortunately, only Dr. Bailey knew the location of the bomb, so they had to wait until the doctor's memory returned to normal. Sometime later, they finally managed to sneak into Moscow. Suddenly, Han reappears seeking revenge, and Frank doesn't run out of ideas. When Han is busy fighting the police, Frank suddenly handcuffs Han's hands to a refrigerator. Not stopping there, Frank also calls for backup police through the radio. As a result, Han is now surrounded from all directions. Instead of surrendering, Han fights back and attacks the police, managing to kill them all. That night, Dr. Bailey's memory started to return, and he became certain of where the nuclear bomb was hidden. Without wasting time, the next morning they all head to the location. After wandering for several hours, Dr. Bailey remembers that the nuclear bomb is hidden in the presidential palace. The problem is, getting inside will not be easy. Fortunately, Dr. Bailey knows a secret passage to infiltrate it. On the other hand, Victoria was seen being interrogated by the head of MI6. At that moment, the intelligence chief shows evidence of why Dr. Bailey was imprisoned for 32 years. Seeing these facts, Victoria regrets and feels that Frank's life is in danger. Unfortunately, it is too late as she has already been sentenced to death. However, just before her execution, Victoria manages to escape again. Back to Frank and his friends, who are traversing a secret tunnel leading to the presidential palace. It turns out that after 32 years, the end of the tunnel has been sealed. Therefore, they are forced to blow up the blocking wall using a bomb. The hole caused by the explosion will be a problem if discovered by the guards, so Sarah is assigned to stand guard in front of the room until they find the nuclear bomb. Frank is somewhat worried that his girlfriend's cover might be blown, but they have no other choice. Meanwhile, Dr. Bailey's memory proves to be quite sharp, as it doesn't take long for them to find the nuclear bomb. It turns out that Dr. Bailey's bomb emits no radiation at all, which is why, even after 32 years, no one has managed to find it. A new problem arises when Miranda suddenly catches them. It turns out that Miranda had been aware of Frank's presence all along. At that moment, Frank stands his ground, insisting that the nuclear bomb must be destroyed because no country deserves to keep it. At the same time, a Russian soldier tries to make Sarah's acquaintance. Due to the language barrier, Sarah remains silent, even when the soldier tries to kiss her. Fortunately, Frank arrives soon after and Frank is understandably upset to see his girlfriend kissing another man. But there's no time to argue as they all need to escape immediately. That night, they celebrate the successful mission. However, during the event, Victoria suddenly informs Frank of a shocking fact. The reason Dr. Bailey was detained for 32 years was that he planned to detonate the nuclear bomb. Unfortunately, Victoria's warning comes too late, as Dr. Bailey had anticipated that Frank would eventually discover the truth about his past. Moreover, Dr. Bailey secretly contacted Jack and offered to collaborate. They are now surrounded, and a shootout ensues, resulting in Miranda's death. Upon reaching the runway, Jack betrays them. From the beginning, Jack only wanted the bomb, and the US government also plans to incarcerate Dr. Bailey in a special facility, just like the British had done. Strangely, despite the betrayal, Dr. Bailey remains very calm, having anticipated this outcome. During the flight, Dr. Bailey manages to free himself. He then plans to kill everyone on the plane using a toxic gas. However, the deadly gas doesn't affect Dr. Bailey because he has the antidote. The next day, Frank and his team are prepared for execution, where the Russian government believes they killed Miranda. However, at the last moment, Victoria and Ivan reappear. According to the information they have, the plane carrying Dr. Bailey made an emergency landing in London. Worse still, Dr. Bailey plans to sell the bomb to the Iranian government. Without wasting time, Frank and his team prepare to head to London, but while refueling, Han suddenly reappears. Apparently, Han holds a grudge against Frank because, back when he was a special agent in Korea, Frank once trapped him. As a result, Han was branded a traitor by his own country, which led him to start his career as a hitman. Knowing that Han is actually a good person, Frank tries to convince him during their fight that there is a nuclear bomb ready to explode in the middle of London. One wrong move and 11 million lives could be lost. Because of this, Han begins to soften. Shortly after, Frank's friends were surprised to see Han board the plane, especially since it was originally his. Meanwhile, Dr. Bailey is reportedly hiding in the Iranian embassy located in the heart of London. To get inside, they are forced to use Sarah as bait. Before the mission, Frank gives Sarah a gift in the form of a pistol. The plan begins at the restaurant, where an Iranian official is present. Seeing Sarah crying over being left by her boyfriend, the official approaches and introduces himself. When the opportunity arises, Sarah suddenly injects a deadly poison into the target's body. If the target wants the antidote, he must help her enter the embassy. At the same time, Dr. Bailey is conducting a transaction with high-ranking Iranian officials. At that time, the bomb is sold for a fantastic amount, while Dr. Bailey also intentionally keeps Jack alive as proof to others that Jack indeed betrayed his country. However, when the opportunity arises, Dr. Bailey kills everyone in the room because he has planned from the beginning to detonate the nuclear bomb there. Additionally, Dr. Bailey reveals that 32 years ago, his wife and child died as a result of the Cold War, and now he wants revenge by starting a war. On the other hand, Sarah manages to enter the embassy without inspection. Along the way, she meets Marvin and gives him a package. It turns out that Marvin had already infiltrated the embassy earlier. Marvin then entrusts Sarah with weapons and a bomb. As the bomb is designed to blow up all the water pipes in the building, and once that happens, they will automatically call a plumber. At that moment, Frank and Han will appear. Unfortunately, when they get inside, the nuclear bomb is already active. Even though Marvin is an expert in bomb defusal, Dr. Bailey's bomb has a very complex system. Victoria is then assigned to ensure Dr. Bailey does not escape from the building. Shortly after, due to the sound of gunfire on the lower floor, their cover is blown, and a shootout ensues. While everyone is busy fighting the guards, Dr. Bailey appears and manages to escape with Sarah. Meanwhile, Han and Victoria try to chase Dr. Bailey using a luxury car, but they are also pursued by Iranian security forces. Frank and Marvin decide to chase them using a helicopter parked behind the embassy. During the flight, Marvin tries to neutralize the bomb in his lap, but ultimately it is in vain. With 30 minutes left before the bomb detonates, the situation becomes increasingly tense for Han and Victoria as their car is relentlessly pursued by Iranian forces. When the opportunity arises, they launch a counterattack. Unfortunately, during the gunfight, a stray bullet hits the pilot of Frank's helicopter. At the same time, Dr. Bailey heads to the airport. With the helicopter pilot shot, Frank's helicopter cannot fly freely in the area. To make matters worse, with the pilot dead, the helicopter becomes uncontrollable, and any movement only increases the danger. With 15 minutes left before the bomb explodes, Frank steals an airport official's car and heads to the airplane parking area. Frank is certain that Dr. Bailey is preparing to take off. However, when Frank boards the plane, he finds Dr. Bailey ready to shoot Sarah in the head. Because of this, Frank is helpless with his girlfriend's life in danger. In the end, Dr. Bailey manages to take off, leaving Frank and his friends on the runway. Marvin and the others brace themselves for death as the bomb is set to explode in 3 minutes. However, during the flight, Dr. Bailey suddenly notices a strange noise coming from behind the cockpit. It turns out that before entering to save Sarah, Frank had secretly stopped for a moment and placed the bomb behind the cockpit. None of them realized his action. In the end, everyone is grateful for Frank's ingenious move, except for Han because his private jet is now destroyed. Moral lesson from the story: don't be so paranoid that you stab your friend's corpse just to be sure. It might make your girlfriend